Salutations, Songbirdians! Welcome to First 5 Pages. Here's the drill. I read the first 5 episodes of a webcomic or novel at minimum, and come to you, my wondrous viewers, to talk about it and tell you what I think about it. Today's episode is very special as I will be covering a webcomic that has a live-action K-drama adaptation called A Business Proposal by Guava Farm, Perilla, Narek, and Heiwa. Now, because this has live-action adaptation and a novel adaptation, I will be covering all 3 and how I feel about them. The story itself goes as follows. A woman who works at a company named Hari made a deal with her friend to go on a blind date for her to try and scare off a guy the friend's father arranged. Little did she know her blind date was the new head of the company she works at. The man is named Temu, and he is around her age. Despite the fact she tried to push him away while in disguise, as she was pretending to be her best friend, Temu proposes a fake relationship with her in order to get his grandfather off his back. Now, because the series has so many versions, I would be remiss not to bring up the length of each. From the live-action series, it has about 12 episodes at an hour apiece. It has 28 language subtitles and 9 dub options. So you're in for like a 12-hour binge with this. And as of when I wrote the script, it is streaming on Netflix. It is a completed series, so be ready for a medium-sized binge for the K-drama adaptations as far as I've seen K-dramas go. The webcomic version is on the app called Tapas and has about 130 episodes, though because of how Tapas does things, all but the last 39 episodes are free, and past the first 5 episodes, you will have to wait a whole day to read the next chapter. And similarly follows the novel version of the book, though the wait time is 3 hours when I wrote the script, not a whole day. If you don't want to do that, you are better off trying to buy a printed version of it. Tapas does have an unlock system where you can get an in-app currency to perma-unlock the series, and they do offer a free weekly sum via a fortune cookie, which gives you a random amount, which means that once a week you will get a second episode in one day, depending on how much it gives you. Be warned though, it takes patience and consistency. For the ones I like, which tend to be expensive because they are popular transfers from another webcomic site, I have to log in every week because the ink from 1 week alone is not enough. The free ink dries up after 2 weeks, so again, if you don't want to do that, just purchase the physical or ebook version from your local book retailer. If they don't have it, then just go buy it on Amazon, because I know for sure it's on there. Now that I've got that spiel out of the way, let's go over how I feel about it one series at a time. Starting with the K-drama adaptation. I actually read the series from start to finish as it updated, but that was around 4 years ago. When it finished. Thus, I completely forgot it existed until I saw there was a K-drama adaptation on Netflix And it got mentioned in an interview I saw with K-pop Demon Hunter, with the K-pop Demon Hunter cat. I could remember the vague overarching details, and more memories of this drama came to me as I watched. All in all, I believe the K-drama version is worth the watch, is worth the time spent on the 12 hours to binge the series. I found myself really invested and glad that I was alone in my house to yell at the TV. As this sort of show is the exact kind of show I like to watch to blow up, to relax, let out my frustrations by yelling at it like I'm watching a sports game. For me, it's very cathartic and allows me to stay sunny in gloomy circumstances rather than frozen in anger or fear. I highly recommend yelling at cheesy shows and movies in your own homes if you ever want to give that a try. This is a great series to do that with. Overall, watching the show made me feel like I was experiencing the story for the first time all over again. It got extra brownie points for including things directly from the comic in the actual show on the first episode itself. In terms of appearance, they actually got pretty close to the look of the comics, in my opinion. However, they did include some dialogue when I watched the dub, where they were referencing a wig, including a whole scene where someone yanks on her hair to reveal her identity, which from a writing standpoint doesn't make sense if the character isn't wearing a wig at all in the show. But I was absolutely gagged by the end of the season. Shows like this on Netflix tend to only get one season, so the fact they didn't end it with the main pair at least being engaged is crazy to me, like absolutely nuts. I tried to put a line here about how it didn't end where I thought it would, but it met my expectations in its own time, which is a running theme in the story. Yeah, so that's great job on their part. But this is for sure a show you watch for the vibes, just plain and simple. Though sometimes I giggle thinking about an Archaeopteryx. Also, little fun fact. In K-pop Demon Hunters, there is a song that plays when Rumi first lays eyes on Jinu. And what's really funny is that song is actually from the drama adaptation of Business Proposal. So you better believe when I watched it, I was having so many K-pop Demon Hunter flashbacks. It was insane. Just flashbacks the entire show because it's the outro. It's a great song. I love it. I listen to it on repeat. But oh my goodness. It was so clever of them to include that song in K-pop Demon Hunters. So as for the webcomic, I did have to reread it again for the review. So it's not a test of if it's worth it, but if the nostalgia holds up, as it is easy for me to read through something once. But it is difficult for me to reread it, especially if it's a short length series compared to what I typically indulge in. If you want to know more about the webcomic, go and read it yourself. Or if you want my review, just wait. I will tell you. But before I tell you what I remember of the webcomic or discuss it, let's move on to the actual web novel itself. The original, the OG, the one that started it all. I I never read the novelization before, so this is my first impression as I wrote the script as I was reading it. First off, episode 1 doesn't take the paragraph to describe what the characters look like, which, depending on the reader, could be a big plus or a massive red flag for me, which is fine because I both watched the drama and read the webcomic before, so I know what they look like. But for a first-time reader, it only breeds confusion, as when anything is mentioned about the appearance than the one they had to use to fill in the blanks, it will make them confused, and in some cases need to reread it in a different light. Storyline-wise, it started the same as the webcomic, which isn't a surprise. It started straight off with a marriage proposal. But what is interesting to note, though, the novel mentions that Hari was wearing granny pants, which this is interesting to me because in every iteration, since she is not wearing what I would consider granny pants, but yoga pants. Intriguing that the artist and the drama creators chose to interpret this line in this way. To me, grandma pants are baggy sweats with massive pockets, because that's what my own grandmothers wear. That or pajama pants also with pockets. I understand that she is at work, however. Yoga pants are on the nice side of casual and makes most women who wear it, in my experience and personal opinion, look casually athletic, so I don't understand how this would make her feel unattractive. But then again, I'm a neurospicy person who lacks confidence the second I wear low-rise pants and a shirt with a low collar. By episode 2, I wrote this as I realized I am being hypercritical of it, which I decided was a good thing. Because that means that you, my lovely viewers, are getting to know the story a bit before going. As I read episode 2, I took note of a couple of things. First, Hari finds out about the avian flu through her brother. From the perspective of a writer, this makes it feel like an actual plot point that's happening in the female lead's life, actively in the background, rather than a mild annoyance for her character. What's interesting, though, is the presence of this throughout the different iterations. The webcomic, it is simply offhandedly mentioned in the flashback, but in the drama, it is only mentioned during a montage of her backstory when they explain that Hari is in debt. Offhandedly mentioning it makes it feel less like an important detail that factors directly into the decisions and actions the character is making and taking, which is what the avian flu is supposed to be. And more like a mild annoyance of little consequence. It's more of an excuse to complain, if you will. Well, for the characters to complain. However, with the drama, it being mentioned during the flashback does make it feel a little more important. The flashback doesn't make it feel like the avian flu has any importance has any presence in the story, as it is a completed plot point, but still something the character kept in the back of her mind in the first half of the season. In terms of my preference as a writer, I prefer the novel's approach, as it is a major factor in the female lead's thinking process and allows the unconventional decision to make sense without use of a headcanon that requires neurodivergency, as I tend to do to make some stories that don't make sense otherwise. A perfect example of this is the show I Love Lucy. Half of that show does not make sense until you add ADHD into the mix. Like, I'm dead serious. I'm saying this as a woman with ADHD. I love Lucy. The main character's experience, I swear, is the actual female experience for ADHD. While the story itself is great, and I do like it, as I read the novelization and do my best to keep the different iterations separate, I find myself reliant on the images of the characters from the other iterations, so I can properly picture the scene as I read, as there are no descriptions of the characters or even scenery around them. I understand it is a light novel and meant to be easy to read, but that's not an excuse to ignore descriptions. I have both seen and written fanfics that at least take one sentence to describe the surroundings the character was in. And that's fanfiction! I am sure this changes in the later chapters, but look at the series name. Go figure. Lastly, for chapter 2, it doesn't feel like a chapter 2. Truly, with the first 2 chapters, it feels like they are out of order. Like, chapter 2 would have been chapter 1, and chapter 1 would have been chapter 2, or should have been chapter 2. Especially given that the writer did not take the 2 extra words to make it clear that chapter 2 is a flashback. I only know it is a flashback because, again, I read the other iterations first. Like, I'm finding as I found as I read more and more of it, I was leaning heavily on the other iterations. And it's just not okay for that. Like, this is supposed to be a polished, finished product. And the novel came first. And it takes just 2 words at either the end of the last chapter or the start of the flashback chapter to make it clear that it is a flashback. Seriously, just the words flashback at either the end of the last one or the start of this one of chapter 2 makes it very blatantly clear it is supposed to be a flashback. When you don't do that, though, all you're doing is confusing readers. Which, funny enough, it's because of this and my heavy reliance on the other iterations because of the lack of descriptors in the novel version. I know that if I had read the novelization first, at least the one that's available on Tapas, I cannot express enough, this was on Tapas specifically. So it's like, if that was my first experience, I would have dropped it immediately. This video would not be made. I just would have avoided it like the plague because it's such a bad first experience. And again, it's a very bad first experience for readers who, for like new readers coming into Business Proposal for the first time, precisely because they did not make it clear that chapter 2 is supposed to be a flashback. Because chapter 1 continues directly off with the prologue. And because chapter 1 continues with the prologue, it just gets really confusing why they would jump back, go end chapter 1, and then start with a flashback in the very next chapter. I would be very, very confused as to why that happened. I actually think I read a story once where it actually was like that. I can't remember its name, but that's probably a good thing. But honestly, as a note to my future self and other writers, if I myself ever watch this video, or if other writers are actually watching this video, if I ever decide to start the story with the direct consequence of the prologue or of the inciting incident, either label the chapter with the consequence in the prologue, or take the extra words to start a flashback sequence either at the end of the chapter or the start of the next. Simply leaving it as chapter 1 and going straight to a flashback at the next only confuses readers, as well as like having the prologue be the consequent, be like direct morning after of the inciting incident, and also having chapter 1 be the inciting incident. Just have them as the same just have both of them be the prologue. The same prologue. Like, as I spoke, I remembered more about my feelings of this, so now woo! Calm down, Luna. Reading on with chapter 3, aside from small issues I had previously stated, the only thing I really have to say on it is that the chairman is as eccentric as ever, which makes him really fun. And chapter 4 is decent. It is the fated date mentioned in chapter 1, so I expected the style of the writing to be a little different, as this is the scene the writer was leading up to. And when you lead up to a scene, you want it to look and sound at least a little different from the other chapters, as, you know, you want the readers to be excited. You want it to punch. Unfortunately, it does have the same problems of lacking lacking descriptions of appearances, making the story a bit confusing, especially as this chapter has more attention to detail in terms of action. For a specific example, in this chapter, there wasn't a description of the outfit Haruhi was wearing, nor was there a description of what Temu was wearing, but he's wearing the same thing he wears at work, because he didn't care, which is, it's fine. Just makes sense. But one thing is clear, during this date, Haruhi was wearing something wildly different from what she usually wears, because the writer actually stated that several times, without adding a description of it. The only the closest thing we got to an actual description of what she was wearing was that she was wearing a pound of makeup and had padding in her bra, which gave me the impression that the writer did not have an idea of what they wanted Haruhi to look like, at least not anything in particular. So I pictured a champagne dress that's loose around the hips and that has a deep V-neck, because I personally have a weakness for champagne dresses, and it makes sense for a fit to show off the cleavage, especially when you're wanting to give off the vibe of skanky. That's bad, Luna. Except the writer made the outfit do something that completely betrayed the image in my head, and that is the hem of the skirt rolled up her legs. Legs, plural. Champagne dresses are long enough that they don't really roll up, they slide up. And not only that, but when it does slide, you can only really feel it on one leg, as the other leg tends to be fully exposed. But unfortunately, having the saying rolled up the leg, not only completely betraying the image the reader had in their head, but also does mean that the writer did in fact have a specific image in mind for what she was wearing, and just didn't bother to explain it, which is really infuriating, because if you're gonna have the dress do specific things, describe the freaking dress. Like, come on, it's not all that hard to do. Just look up some basic fashion design videos online and just pull something out. Like, I'm not even kidding. I took a fashion design class in high school, and I still use that to this day to make outfits for my characters. Character fashion, so easy. But with all of my criticisms aside, I do like how Hari feels insecure about how she is dressed, especially when confronted with a cute guy close to her age. I can relate to feeling out of place in feminine clothing and wearing makeup you feel like doesn't suit you, as this was my experience going to church for a lot of my life. I personally feel much more comfortable in pants, or at least wearing shorts under my skirt. And while I eventually got used to the knee-length skirt, I still felt uncomfortable with makeup, with wearing makeup too often, like with the basic makeup style, until I learned how to do Decora makeup. It sucks feeling insecure about something you want to be. It's because of this moment that I find Hari the most relatable, and is actually the moment I fell in love with this story, because when I read it the first time anyway, because she really is just like me, for real, and it pleases me to know that the novel is no different. Now, Chapter 5 is where I will end my review for the novel. Reading it, the words feel like either the writer's first novel or a fan-made novelization of the webcomic. This is not to say it's bad, but it just feels very unpolished compared to the later adaptations, which is very unfortunate because, again, this is the novel, this was the first one made. And there are a lot of base issues that generally could have been avoided with someone who's editing, or if the person had a beta reader. You know, just simple problems that are easy to solve before it gets published. And that just didn't happen, which, again, very unfortunate for the story. But because of this, that made it clear to me that the reason it was adapted in the first place is because the story in and of itself was very simple, which made it easy for adaptation creativity-wise. One thing is for sure though, Business Proposal pulled off something that is extremely rare, and that is simply an adaptation that's the same beat for beat across all adaptations. I mean, seriously, the only real difference plot-wise is the extra scene in the drama with the concerts. But hindsight, I don't think that the scene in the drama where they're off shooting a video for the company is actually in the web novel either. But that's still doesn't really add much to the plot, just adds a little bit of extra character drama in. So with that in mind, I think the novel is really only worth it if you are a fanfic reader, or are just really or if you finish the other versions and just hunger for more. But it definitely is the lesser of the three adaptations, purely because it just doesn't do a good job of creating a specific scenes in the mind of the reader. In my personal opinion, you are better off starting with the graphic novel or the drama. As again, there's literally only maybe 1 or 2 scenes difference between the two. Now, as I see this video is starting to get a bit long, I will end it here. If you want to find out about the webcomic of which I have been singing the highest of praises about, be sure to come back next week for part 2.